Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. As we're preparing to get started, we're going to try something new, and we have a site called Today's Meetup there. And this is a way to have kind of a back-channel conversation in which if you log on via cell phone or any other device that you may have with you today, you can ask us questions through this site. There was a couple questions that we're going to shoot out to you guys that if you log in, you can put responses up there, or you can respond orally as well. But it allows kind of two conversations to go on at one time. We will try our best to answer the questions, kind of depending on time and how many there are. We'll try our best to answer them all today, but if not, we'll find another way to get the answers to you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's first District 96 Parent University. I am Bhavna Sharma-Lewis, the superintendent, and my job today is to welcome you and to introduce our presenters, as well as to give an overview of what tonight's going to be. What we've been doing as a district, and we did this at board meetings, and principals have done this with their own staff, as well as department heads have done this with their staff as well, is go over the characteristics of high-achieving schools. And one of the things is to have a clear and shared focus. That's the number one thing. When everyone is believing and doing and focusing on the same things, you are going to get high results. And that's what tonight is all about, is to bring us all together about Common Core standards and what the assessments look like and how you can help and support your child at home just by knowing what we're doing in school. And if you go down to number 9, high levels of family and community involvement, well, tonight speaks to that with all of you being here with your support and dedication in finding out what's going on and how you can better help support your child at home. The third thing that's really important and that we've really emphasized this year is effective school leadership. Our principals are leading all of our professional development on Monday with their buildings and with their staff and with their teams, as well as tonight they're going to be presenting different portions of tonight's information. So you're going to see and hear right from our school leaders what teachers and kids are actually doing from the boots on the ground. So I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce our district leadership team, and then they are going to start the evening's presentation. So I have here first. Did I turn it off? Sorry. I can't. I'm going to go this way. Dr. Brian Gannon, who is our Director of Academic Excellence. Ms. Casimira Gorman, who is our principal at Blythe Park School. Mr. Kurt Preble, who is our principal at Hollywood School. Mr. Todd Gearman, who's principal at Ames. Mr. Peter Gatz, who is the principal at Central. Ms. Stacy Weston, who is assistant principal at Hauser Junior High School. Mr. Steve Jaraka, principal at Hauser Junior High School. And Mr. Steve Elginus, who is a 5th grade teacher at Central, who will also be showing you what the actual lesson planning and what it looks like in the classroom. And then 2 of our support personnel who are here is our Director of Technology and Instruction and Innovation, Mr. Don Tefano, and our Instructional Technology Specialist, Mr. Bob Petito. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy your evening and find it to be informative. I'm going to introduce Dr. Gannon, who's going to take it over from here.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma-Lewis. All right, before I get into the presentation, I just want to kind of share a quick story that happened to me just last night. As we're all implementing Common Core and trying to help with our children at home and really trying to understand what Common Core is all about and how to best support our students, it's a continuous learning curve, and it was demonstrated to me last night. My daughter and I were at Noodles Restaurant right before her guitar class. And she says, Daddy, I have to do my homework, which was awesome that she brought that up to me. And she pulls out her word sorts. And I start to help her on them. And she says, Dad, no, that's not how you do it. That's not how we learned it. And so she went through a process, and it was a process, and she taught me how she is learning her word sorts, the different letter sounds. And it was an approach that, personally, I had never thought of using, but it was great. So we're all in this together as we look to enhance our students' education, and there's always going to be additional things for us to learn. So you'll see that as we go through our presentation today, we're fully committed to enhancing our new curriculum, changing our new curriculum when appropriate, and learning. So this is going to be a continuous process. And if you guys hear any great ideas out there or anything that you'd like to share with us as well, please do. Tonight's meeting has really two purposes. One is to build your familiarity with the Common Core state standards. And the other one is to build your familiarity with how we in District 96 have aligned to the Common Core state standards. I'll be real honest and say that we've done a lot of work in a short amount of time. And so I'm really thrilled with our staff and our administrators with the fact that we are ready and we are implementing this year. But as I said earlier, as we go through the process, I'm sure changes will be made, enhancements will be made as well. So just real quick, if you want to turn to a partner, and we're just curious to know, one, what have you heard about the Common Core state standards? And two, what are you hoping to learn about Common Core? So if you can just for maybe 2 minutes talk with somebody next to you and just discuss one of those two questions, or if you have time, both of them. Thank you. And if you're brave and want to share something up there in our new Today's Meet site, please go ahead. Thanks. All right, in 3, 2, 1, and we are back. Does anybody want to share what they've heard about the Common Core state standards? Because there's a lot of truth and a lot of myth out there with Common Core. Does anybody have anything to share about? Mrs. Lobby, thank you.
You're welcome. I've heard a lot of good things on the reading. I've looked at the websites, but even on newspapers, articles, radios, you hear a lot of negativity on the math. With not having to memorize the facts, now they want to take a minute to do a simple multiplication or addition problem, which takes away from other valuable learning tools. There's some, and I see some basis to it, some good, but I see the math being mixed. I like some, but I see the math being very negative on taking away from other educational aspects.
Awesome. Thank you. We actually have a short video we're going to show later on that kind of addresses the math conundrum a little bit, so thank you. Anybody else? Yes?
I've heard that the standards are supposed to be more rigorous and in-depth and involve more critical thinking on the positive. On the negative side is something I just saw today out in the media, along with math, is that it looks as though, according to this person, and I don't know the truth, and I would like to know the truth, that kids would be marked wrong on a math problem if they didn't solve it in a particular manner. It didn't matter if they got the correct answer or not. This particular example, they wanted them to solve it with drawing circles and hash marks rather than maybe doing the calculation or some other sort of mental math that they might then describe.
Okay. So they can come up with the right answer, but if they don't do it the correct way, excellent. We'll be talking a little bit about that. In my experiences, that is not the case. As a matter of fact, Common Core really should allow for students to kind of choose their path to find the answer. We need to make sure they have the skills to be able to identify that path. So, thank you. Yes?
If you could perhaps share a little bit with us about why some states have decided not to implement Common Core?
I can. And in the next slide, you'll see that 45 states have implemented Common Core. It was 46, and then Indiana dropped out. And there's for various reasons. I don't know specifically each state's reason. Some states, have felt like their standards were more rigorous than the Common Core. Others have just elected to, keep with their current state standards that they already have, and that could be for several reasons. I don't know if it's a philosophical reason, or if it's just more of a independent type decision. But there's one state that has adopted, one and not the other. So it all kind of varies depending on the state, depending on their standards. For Illinois, our standards were not at the top of the list. So for us, this is a nice climb. The rigor's higher, but I don't think every state felt that way. Very few, obviously, but some didn't. Absolutely. Okay, what are you hoping to learn today? I know there's the question about the math. Anything else? Mrs. Gaynor. Excellent. Excellent, thank you. One of the packets that you have, we are going to address that as well, but one of the packets that hopefully you grabbed on the way in, if not, there's some available on the way out, gives you some insight and advice and some help about supporting your child at home. There's also websites in there that are very, very effective in helping at home. And of course, those are more Common Core general type help, and not necessarily District 96 curriculum type help, but in one sense, they're one and the same because our curriculum is standards driven. Anything else? Yes?
I would like to have examples of how mathematics in particular will be more in depth and more rigorous, because what I've seen so far coming home doesn't seem to be showing that.
Okay, good. Okay, we will be going through some of the differences in mathematical instruction, and depending on the scope and sequence of the standards, some of that rigor starts to come at a little bit later time. There's some grade levels that have started right away with a little bit more of a higher level, and there were some whose first couple set of standards a lot of our students have mastered, and we hope it stays that way, but the rigor builds up from there as well. So. Okay, yes sir.
Can you share like the benchmark that you will be using to engage after a couple of months if this is working or we need to tweak along the way?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And we'll address that later on in the presentation. Thank you. Yes?
I'm curious how the teachers feel so far about maybe using everyday math still, but also maybe the new McGraw-Hill text, and are they struggling to work with multiple pieces of curriculum at the same time, or how are they doing? Does it make them less efficient?
Excellent. Can I ask you to hold that question? We will address it. I think there's a nice time in the presentation to address it. But to kind of just lead into it a little bit, if there is, if we were able to this year, identify a Common Core curriculum that is truly fully aligned to Common Core, it's something that, we're going to investigate as well. But we do have something called the Synced Solution that helps our teachers kind of put everything together and organize it as well. And I know Everyday Math is coming out with some new stuff next year as well. So, okay. Thank you. Okay, so the key ideas for the Common Core state standards, and this is pretty general because there's more than four, but these are the four main key ideas. The goal is for all students graduating from high school to be college and career ready. And so the standards are very much, well, I'm going to show you a video in a few minutes, they build very closely from one grade level to the next. And in ELA, which is English Language Arts, there are 10 anchor standards. And these 10 anchor standards are what students must master at each grade level to be college and career ready. The other one is, so the Common Core, and this is one of those fact, myths type questions that comes up a lot. The development of the Common Core was led by the states. It wasn't a federal initiative. And you can see that in a sense where some states have, either never joined or, Indiana was in and now they're out. We do have 45 states and Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, that have adopted, and of course, Illinois is one of them. And our new assessment, replacing the ISAT in 2014 and 15, is the PARC assessment. We will talk briefly about that today, but we do not wait for that assessment before we revise and tweak our curriculum, because this is an end-of-the-year assessment. So, yes?
I'm sorry, I had a question, we're back on the last slide, but it's related to this. I guess the question I have about the Common Core is, how will this impact schools and individual teachers' freedom to be creative with the curriculum and encourage student creativity too, especially when there's so much emphasis on standards being met by the testing, as well as specific instruction, as was mentioned earlier, precise ways that problem has to be solved.
Excellent. So that's a great question. Common Core really, it tells, what it does is it's a set of standards that students need to be able to master, but it does not, and there's the last slide I think of today, we'll go over this more, but it does not have anything to do with, or there's nothing in the Common Core that tells us how to teach. So basically, it lets us know what students need to know in order to be college and career ready. But we have the, teachers have the freedom and the autonomy, and in our district as well, districts probably do it differently, but we have shared resources, common resources, but the how, the teaching, the instructional strategies, the approach, the creativity is all, vested within the teacher, and it's also part of our professional development as well. And we're very sensitive to that because, and we say it all the time, is that each teacher brings something special into that classroom, so we're very sensitive to that creativity. Also, student choice is a big part of Common Core. So student choice is within the curriculum. It needs to stay in the curriculum. Okay. One more question, and then we're going to move forward.
Going back to assessment and the idea of mathematics in particular about, it might take a little while for the rigor to start building a beam there. Is there, in the district, the philosophy of giving some sort of pre-test or some sort of assessment before something is introduced into the classroom, so those students who have already mastered it can do some other sort of connection work, or those who really need help with it have that mediation, particularly on the end of having already mastered, so they're not basically
Sure. Yes, that's another great question. So the answer to that is yes. We just finished up our MAP assessments, which is Common Core aligned. Once we get that data, we'll be able to break each student's performance down into strands, performance strands. And since now our curriculum is aligned to Common Core and the test is aligned to Common Core, we'll be able to look at those strands. We will see what students have mastered, and we'll be able to go more in depth within those concepts. And at times that might mean a higher grade level, or depending on where the student's performance is, because the standards are so closely aligned that you can focus on a similar concept, but you can go more in depth. But this will be one of the first times that we'll be able to really truly look at Common Core aligned assessment, which is our fall MAP, and use it to drive instruction. We also have some additional resources coming that are really focused and centered on differentiation in mathematics. And there's varying levels within the resources to teach a specific concept or standard. The map data should be, we just finished it up. It's usually a pretty quick turnaround. So we are hoping by the end of next week we'll be able to have that data ready to go. Thank you. Okay. Movie time.
Like it or not, life is full of measuring sticks. How smart we are, how fast we are, how well we can, compete. But up until now, it's been pretty hard to tell how well kids are competing in school and how well they're going to do when they get out of school. We like to think that our education system does that, but when it comes to learning what they really need to be successful after graduation, is a girl in your neighborhood being taught as much as her friend over in the next one? Is a graduating senior in, say, St. Louis as prepared to get a job as the graduate in Shanghai? Well, it turns out the answer to both of these questions is no. Because for years, states have been setting different standards for what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. That's making it too hard to know if our kids are really doing well enough overall, and if they can really compete for a job someday. What we really need are clear goals. That's where the Common Core state standards come in. They're like a total sea change in education. Consistent, strong, clear benchmarks for English language arts and math. Here's how it works. You can think of kindergarten through 12th grade like a giant staircase. Each step is a skill your child needs to learn before stepping up to the next one. But right now, too many kids aren't really confident with like 2 plus 2 before they have to move on to 2 times 2. We need more focus on the skills that help them move up the stairs, or they can slip up and fall behind. And there's another problem. What if everyone's stairs were made at different heights? Well, here we go again. They are. So, a boy in Seattle who's rocking an A in English literature could be getting a C on his Chicago friend's staircase. Oops. We need to create consistent steps in education, too. So first, each standard creates a landing on the staircase, a stop along the way as your child heads toward high school graduation. Each stop is a chance for every parent and teacher to focus on the skills their students are supposed to know at that step, no matter the zip code, language, or race. And more importantly, each standard makes sure all students are learning what they need to know to get to graduation and beyond. Because something like counting to 100 leads to understanding dollars and cents, which eventually leads to understanding how to manage a budget. Secondly, the standards are consistent from school to school, and they match up against international standards too. Now we know how we're doing compared to just about everyone. So even though local communities will still design their own curriculum, with the same rules, everybody can compete on the same kind of staircase. But standards aren't learning. That's why we need teachers, parents, and students to help make that happen by working together to help kids meet these standards. The world's getting more and more competitive every day. But now, when our kids get to the top of their staircase, they can have way more options on where their life goes from there. Clear goals, confident, well-prepared students. That's the Common Core state standards.
That video is actually taken directly from the Common Core website, but it hopefully gave you a little bit more of a background as to the real purpose and reasoning behind adopting Common Core state standards. It's probably the first time I've actually had nothing to say. These guys would probably agree. One more, I got it. Okay, real quick, what types of skills do you feel your students will need to be successful in college and future jobs? Because really, that's the huge focus of the Common Core, is we need to make sure that they're prepared to make their choices for whatever they want to do in the future. What are some important skills that you feel your students need to have mastered? Yes, thank you. Okay, problem solving, excellent. Yes, thank you. Communication, very good. Roy? Organization, excellent. Anything else? Inquiry, very good, thank you. Go ahead and shout them out. Critical thinking, excellent. Okay. Teamwork, excellent. Those are all, as you'll see, those are all embedded in the work that we're going to do here in District 96 with our new curriculum. So there's, you hear the 21st century skills, creativity, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. Organization fits, right into that as well. So, and that is really what most of the workplaces today are looking for as well. So we want to make sure we're preparing our students to be successful there. All right, I am now going to turn it over to Ms. Gorman, and she's going to talk about some of the changes that the Common Core has brought about in English language arts instruction. You'll probably hear us say the term ELA. That's English language arts. So, Ms. Gorman?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit about some of the key, advances in ELA and some of the shifts that have been taking place. And if you, I'm going to move my body this way too a little bit. If you look over at the screen right here, it says the first big statement is the balance between literature and informational text. And really, for a long time, and even when we were children, we were growing up, it was very highly literature-based. And as we're moving into the Common Core and we're shifting over into that, we're having a greater understanding of how that balance has to happen. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But then if you want to just look at the other points about focusing rather than on opinion, but more on argumentative writing, argumentative reasoning and rationale and evidence-based, whether it's either verbal discussion or through written expression. Our speaking and our listening skills, which speaks a lot to what you were saying a few minutes ago about organization, cooperation, communication, problem solving. They have to have the ability to speak in front of an audience. They have to be able to engage in a conversation with a colleague. They have to be able to actively listen and hear what someone else is saying in order to problem solve. So those are skills that Common Core are going to address. And then finally, our literacy standards for history, science, and technical subjects. So bringing those other subject areas into ELA and seeing that interdisciplinary connection. Okay, so the National Association for Educational Progress, this is their distribution, and as you notice, for reading text. And as you notice, as we go from grade 4 and 8 and all the way into the 12th grade, how the shifts occurs. So in the 4th grade, we're looking more at like a 50-50 split. But by the time the students get to 12th grade, predominantly they're focused on informational text. And if you think about it, I mean, think about what we read. I mean, how many of us are looking through, news stories or informational text on our way to work? I mean, predominantly reading directions, going through financial documents. I mean, a lot of the text that we read as adults is nonfiction based, okay? So that just speaks to the fact that we need to make sure that our students are able to read and comprehend such material as well. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time right now talking about text complexity. Okay, so there's a misconception out there that if you just place a complicated text in front of a child, that's going to make them a better reader. And we know that's simply not true. Text complexity is a balance of, and it has a lot to do with the layering of text. And it's offering a variety of text to a child so that they really understand at a deeper level the understanding or the meaning behind something. So when you're looking at delving deeper or doing more rigorous thinking or more rigorous conversation between students or among students in a group, teachers are going to be looking at blending fiction and nonfiction, graphic novels, financial documents, blogs. They're going to look at a variety of different texts to present in front of students, and that's really, truly where the deeper meaning happens. I spoke a little bit about this at my parent night, and some parents approached me afterwards. They said that the example I gave provided them with some insights. I'm just giving you an example right now. When I taught in the classroom, I was a 4th grade teacher, and one of my favorite novels was Esperanza Rising. But the reason why I loved it so much was because I layered it with informational text. So for those of you who don't know, Esperanza Rising takes place during the Great Depression, and it's all about a girl who travels from Mexico to California and becomes a migrant worker. But where my students really understood and appreciated the literature and valued it was because we understood, I exposed them to texts that detailed the Great Depression, that looked at Social Security, that what life was like for migrant workers, that talked about racism. And they really understood on a very, very deep level what was going on in this text and related to that character. That's what rigor is, and that's what we want our teachers to do. And that really speaks to the fact of, like, when you have a standard like that, when you have, and the teachers know what the standard is, that's where that teacher creativity comes in. And that's where we're able to create and design lessons that really speak to that standard and really know how to engage our students in that rigorous thinking process. Okay, so there's two aspects to text complexity, and there's a quantitative aspect and there's a qualitative. How many people here, probably in the past during parent-teacher conferences or maybe just through conversation with your children, you've heard of like Lexile level? Have you heard of that? Okay, so that's the quantitative piece, and that speaks to the sentence length, and it also speaks to vocabulary, okay? But it doesn't take into context the content of the story, the writing style, or anything like that. Quantitatively, Lexile is a great way to kind of start to gauge what is appropriate for your reader. But for example, if I think of a book like Ernest Hemingway's, like The Sun Also Rises, okay, that has a relatively low Lexile level, but I would never place it in front of an elementary student. The content and the context isn't appropriate for them. And that's where that qualitative piece comes in. Okay, and the qualitative piece is really, truly who we are as readers. It's our paying attention to detail, our understanding of the purpose of the text, and what the text demands of us. And so as teachers and as educators, we have to understand that balance when we're presenting that information in front with students. And we have to take into consideration the quantitative, the ability for them to comprehend text, but then also for them to appreciate the content and be able to understand at their developmental level. Shift 3 speaks to academic vocabulary and versus domain specific. So these are what we sometimes will call them Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. Tier 2 words, if you look at the sentence right there, if you look at the word like obstacle. So these are words that are examples of words that we want students to be able to recognize in a variety of different texts and variety of different genres and be able to transfer the meaning. We also call this academic. Academic are more like rigorous text in terms of explaining directions or instructions. So, for example, instead of saying look at something, we might tell students to observe. Things like directions that say evaluate, analyze. We want students to understand what those words mean because they help to guide them in terms of what they're supposed to be able to do. That would be considered academic. And then the Tier 3, when you look at something like a poll text, that's content specific. So those are words at the highest where it helps them to understand more specifically about that subject area that they're focusing, that they're learning. All right, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Preble, and he's going to go into a couple more shifts in ELA.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The fourth shift that we're going to talk about tonight is the text-based questions and answers. And the first bullet point here, readers depend on evidence from text to reach conclusions and build arguments. Now, what this means is that when we are reading something, we are looking into it to find out not only the evidence for the side of the story that we would like to present, but we also need to understand the other side so that we can have that argument. We can place some points of some talking points into our pieces that allow us to show maybe why my side is better than yours. For example, one of the classic argument pieces that we can, as teachers, have used in the past, dress code in schools, uniforms versus non-uniforms, things like that. That's an age-old argument piece. Or whether it's good to listen to music while you're doing your homework or not. What are the benefits? And when you're reading at this level with this complexity, what you're able to do is figure out, okay, I know what I prefer, but what does the research show? And then you can make a good argument, a sustainable argument based on those facts, but yet at the same time you have to understand the other side of the argument as well. The second point is reading like a detective and writing like an investigative reporter. Once you're able to establish those facts and pull those facts out of the text, whether it's from a single source or multiple sources, you're able to present those facts in a way that's going to make sense, it's organized, and it proves a point that you're trying to make. So one of the things that has to happen when we are reading at this complex level is we have to ask text-based questions. And I'm going to go through some examples here, a little interactive point of the presentation. I'm going to ask a question, and I just want to see who thinks this may be a text-based question or not. Our first question is, according to the author, how do drops of rain form? So if I could just get a show of hands, how many of you think this is a text-based question? Okay, about half. Well, the text-based question means that you have to read it to understand what the answer is. In this case, yes, you have to have read the text. Now, you may have some background knowledge about how raindrops are formed, but the question is specifically asking about what the author stated, which makes it a text-based question. Second question, what do you know about water treatment in our community? How many of you think this may be a text-based question? Good. It is not. Because it's not text-based, you may already know it, but nowhere in the question is it asking for that evidence. You did not need to pull evidence out. You could have made something up, or something that you heard on TV as kids, doing the research. Maybe it's something that they heard you talking about at the dinner table. Our last one, what kinds of clues might detectives use to solve crimes? How many think this is a text-based question? It's okay to be wrong. Don't be shy. It is not. It's not text-based because you may already have that background knowledge. Maybe you watched CSI last night or something. You got these clues. The answer to this particular question does not depend on what you read in the text at all. Which brings us to our fifth shift. Writing from sources. In order to form those arguments, in order to present that evidence, in order to produce something, we have to be able to find that information in our sources. We can respond through writing to ideas and facts presented in the text, but we also have to be able to read effectively. And I'm on the wrong slide. I knew I went too far. There we go, sorry. First time with the clicker. We need to respond through writing to ideas that are presented in the text. We need to read effectively and also organize our ideas in the writing. So that goes back to, once we found that evidence, we need to be able to produce the evidence that we need to prove our point in an organized manner that makes sense. It requires a higher level of thinking than just answering multiple choice questions. So on an assessment, in order to really know in order to find out what the students know, you need to be able to prove your answer. You don't necessarily need to prove anything if you have A, B, C, and D in front of you. You could always guess one. You have a 25% chance of getting it correct. But when you write based on evidence, you are showing what you know and how you know it. And part of this writing includes short, focused research projects. Sure, there will be some big research projects out there, but there's also going to be several smaller, focused ones, so that you have the opportunity to read short passages, dig out that evidence, and provide evidence of what you've learned in short pieces. It doesn't have to be a 5-paragraph essay or a 5-page paper all the time. It doesn't have to be a giant keynote presentation. But what it can be is a paragraph showing that based on what you've read, you've learned something, and you can only do that through the evidence. Our examples of writing and reading to response. This first one is based on a single source. So perhaps for an assignment, you're going to read the biography of Amelia Earhart. And based on that information, you can write an essay that summarizes and explains the challenges she faced throughout her life. The second example we have up here, the Board of Education is discussing a policy on the sale of energy drinks and vending machines. Use the information in these articles. Write an argumentative essay supporting your stand on this topic. This is not a single source assignment. You would need to take multiple sources, find evidence from these multiple sources. Some are going to help support your side, whether it's yes, they should, or no, they shouldn't. But two things happen here. You are able to pull that evidence to prove your point, but you're also finding that understanding of the other side. And you need to do that to have a successful argument. And the sixth shift is for literacy instruction in all content areas. The content area teachers at grade level 6 and up need to emphasize reading and writing as part of teaching their domain. Everything in every subject is going to have this reading and writing that I was just talking about. It's not just in the language arts portion. It's in your science, it's in your social studies. You're teaching students to read and write like scientists, historians, and mathematicians. If we're to get our students college and career ready, they need to start producing things that they'll be expected to produce when they're college and career ready. That's the whole point. These literacy standards are not meant to replace content standards, but to supplement them. So they're not taking away from what they need to learn, they're adding to how they are learning it and producing the work coming from them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Gierman to talk about math.
Thank you, Mr. Prabhu. Good evening, everybody, and I want to thank you so much for coming here tonight. It means a lot to us, and we appreciate you supporting our district and being here for this informational session tonight. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of math. Let's not change that slide yet. I'd like to see a show of hands of how many people in the room love math. How many people in school love math? Okay. Got a few fibbers out there. Okay, how many people, and same people will raise their hand. How many people went to the nurse's office when there was a math test because they had a tummy ache? There's a few. We're not admitting it, are we? Okay, we're going to build up your confidence. Put your phones away because there's no calculators allowed on this problem. Okay, here we go. I have to hit the button. That was really good. Now that I know what I'm doing here we go. Let's do some math. A vacuum company wants to sell 28 vacuums each week. There are 7 salespeople. How many vacuums must each person sell? No calculators on this. Okay, we can use this cool little site here to enter that answer, or we can just shout it out. What do we think the answer is? Really? We're unsure, aren't we? 4. 4 is the correct answer. Or is it the correct answer? Cue the video. Common Core is about getting the correct answer, but this is a great example, although the way they were working this out was incorrect, and had they had knowledge base of Common Core State Standard number 3A2, which is operations and algebraic thinking, represent and solve students should be able to represent and solve problems involving multiplication and division, interpret whole number quotients and whole numbers. So had they had that lesson, they would have been able to figure this out. I also think it's a great example of multiple paths in order to get to that correct solution, even though they didn't get to the correct solution, and it really leaves you scratching your head. Some of the key advances in Common Core mathematics: focus, coherence, and clarity, emphasis on key topics at each grade level, and coherent progression across grades. Procedural fluency and understanding of concepts and skills, promote rigor through mathematical proficiencies that foster reasoning and understanding across discipline, and high school standards organized by conceptual categories. For many, many years, at least since I've been in education, the mathematics curriculum has been looked at as being a mile wide and an inch deep. The Common Core is designed now to focus more on fewer standards at each grade level, and let's go an inch wide and a mile deep and really go for mastery of those standards. Students are expected to have a much deeper understanding of mathematics if we approach it in that way through the Common Core State Standards. Students will be expected to problem solve and apply these skills to what they have learned. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Gatz, and he's going to be going over some of the 2 sets of standards, content and mathematical practice. And when he hits the mathematical practices page, which there are 8 of, I want you to think about which one of those are the mathematical practices that were actually shown in that video of Abbott and Costello. Thank you very much, and here is Mr. Gatz. Get this out of here.
Good evening, everyone. As Mr. Gierman mentioned, there are 2 sets of standards that fit within the mathematical standards and Common Core state standards. And one is content, the other one is mathematical practice. Think of the 2 as the what and the how, with the content standards being the what, or what the teachers and what the curriculum and what the kids need to know, and what the students need to know at the end of lessons. And the mathematical practice is the how, and that goes back to the question that one of the parents posed earlier tonight. The how isn't determined by the curriculum, the how is determined by the teacher. So the teacher has that autonomy to look and see what the students are supposed to know, look at that standard, and design the how piece that will best meet the needs of the students in their classroom. The standards have shifted a little bit in terms of what kids need to know. And earlier grades, as you can see by the slide here, the focus is more on number sense and operations. Some of those expectations at each of the grade levels may have shifted from where they might have been introduced in the past. A main example of that might be subtraction is taught at an earlier grade, at earlier grades than they were before. And on the flip side of that, some things are taught a little bit later when kids might be a little bit more prepared within the rigor of the standards. Examples of that might be time and money. Middle school standards, as you can see, are focused more on geometry, algebra, probability, and statistics, and those are focused and modeled after standards from high-achieving nations throughout the world. And one thing to remember, and it was mentioned before, is that a lot of those 21st century skills that we talked about, collaboration, communication, technology, problem solving, those things are all integrated within the units and within the standards themselves and the expectations within the lessons that the students experience on a daily basis. And my part was short, but I'd like to turn things over to Mrs. Weston, who will go a little bit more into depth into these mathematical practices that we talked about and that Mr. Gehrman mentioned a minute ago.
Good evening. All right, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the 8 mathematical practices in the Common Core. And the first is make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. So basically, students are making conjectures about the form and the meaning of the solution, planning a pathway into the solution rather than just jumping right into it. And they're consistently asking themselves, does this make sense to me? Rather than going to their teacher right away, they're taking ownership of this. Number 2 is reason abstractly and quantitatively. With this practice, students understand the relationship between the problem, scenarios, and mathematical representation, as well as how the symbols represent strategies for those solutions. And number 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. Basically, in short, this means that students should be able to explain and support their answers. All right, number 4, model with mathematics. This practice focuses on the application of mathematics, and students can apply the math that they know that's going to be arising in their everyday lives, in society, and in the workplace. And then number 5, use appropriate tools strategically. The 5th application is saying that mathematically proficient students are going to consider all of the available tools to them in order to help them solve problems, which are right there for you. All right, number 6, attention to precision. It's pretty much just as it sounds. Students are going to try to communicate and use clear and concise explanations when they're communicating answers with others. Number 7, look for and make use of structure. Students are going to look closely to discern a pattern of structure and apply it to their work. And then the final mathematic practice, look for and express regularity and repeating reasoning. As they're solving problems, they're going to be looking for general methods and shortcuts and how to evaluate their results. So I hope this touches a bit upon some of the questions, especially the one where students are being creative and finding their answers, and it's not just a one-way path. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Jaraka, the principal of Hauser, and he's going to begin a discussion on how the district is aligning our resources to the Common Core state standards.
Well, good evening and welcome. Again, at this point, we've kind of taken a look at the key advances so far in the Common Core state standards. And we should recognize, too, that our new curricula aligned to the Common Core state standards is always under review. It's constantly being retooled and revisited, and will continue to do so throughout this year and the upcoming school years. If your educational experience was a lot like mine, you may recall having entered a math class, and as you entered that math class, you were given a textbook. And that textbook and that class really began on page 1. And you kind of went through your math curricula, basically page 1, through the end of the year, you went page by page and lesson by lesson and unit by unit. With our approach to the Common Core state standards, we're changing things a little bit there. And we're really trying to not have, I apologize, I had not flipped the slide at that point. We are looking to have a situation where it's not our textbook that drives our curriculum, but rather it is our standards that drive our curriculum. So it should really be a situation where our standards are at the focus, or they are the results that we want to achieve, but then it is our resources and our practices that align to those standards to get us the results that we want. So rather than having a situation as we've had in the past where we had our resources drive our end, now we're looking at the standards as our center and again, aligning our practices, aligning our resources to meet those standards. And then, so now I will introduce Mr. Elginus, who's going to talk with you a little bit about the Synced Solution and how that aligns our standards to the Common Core state standards. Thank you.
Okay, I've been asked to come here to give you a little insight into the classroom and how the teachers are using the resources and the curriculum that's been developed. First off, I was fortunate enough to be on the ELA committee for the Common Core implementation, and working with Mr. Preble and Mrs. Wright over in 5th grade, we represented the 5th grade, developing the standards and developing the resources. So this will give you a little insight of what we're doing with some of the resources we've developed. We began at the process with looking at what we had initially. So were we going to simply take the resources that we already had and figure a way to make the Common Core fit what we were already using? This could have been anything from open court basal readers to our guided reading approach. We could have continued with those models. We could have also used current textbooks, current scope and sequence, and say, how can we break apart the Common Core and plug it into what we were already doing? And finally, where we were finding gaps, how could we find additional resources to support what we didn't have? That would have been one approach, but we decided on a better approach. We decided to start from the beginning and really look at the standards and see what do we need to teach. So we began by developing a strong based order of introduction for the skills. We also wanted to do a pacing on our own terms. So how could we reach all of these objectives by the end of the year? So instead of just saying, okay, let's use our materials and let's hope that it touches on all the different standards, let's figure a way to introduce the standards in a sense where it made sense to students. And then how could we build progress monitoring and assessments along with the scope and sequence? Finally, we wanted to determine the use of current instruction materials that we did have and how to use them as a tool to teach the Common Core. That brings us next to the Synced Solution. This is a group that came in, and what they did was they plugged in all of the standards throughout the year. So as a committee, we didn't sit there and spend 3 months, okay, let's map out the standards. How are we going to meet all the objectives, all the standards? That was done for us by the Action Learning Systems and the Synced Solution. So what we were able to do was then take the scope and sequence and the objectives and say, how can we plug that into what we're doing on a daily basis? So that was a web-based solution. They developed the scope and sequence for us. They also gave us measurable objectives that were used. So there's assessments that are built into the Synced Solution. And then finally, it syncs with the materials and the school calendar. So we gave them a copy of our calendar. They plugged in the dates, so it accounted for days we were out of school, so you didn't quickly fall out of sync. So nobody wants to be after the first month saying, oh, we're already behind schedule because they didn't look at our Columbus Day schedule. So that was built in for us. And what I have here is an actual snapshot into how I use it on my computer and how most teachers are using it. If you look at the top, you'll really just see basically a calendar. And where you see those green buttons, if you click on any of those, that will actually launch in Synced Solution the objectives for the day. That'll also include the resources that are used with links that are developed, and whether it be an online resource, maybe it's an online document that the students could access, or maybe it's just a list of the text that the teachers are going to use. The nice thing about this approach is no matter if you're at Blythe or Ames or Hollywood, you could click on one day lesson and say, okay, let's teach this objective. Now, once again, this isn't telling the teacher how to teach it. It's just giving them a resource to use, the skill and the objective they're supposed to address, and that's where their creativity comes in. So that really still gives them flexibility in art. But what it does enable us to look at is that whether you're at Hollywood or Blythe or Ames or Central, all students might be reading, the last book we did was Writing Freedom. And we also decided to focus on the theme of challenge. So I didn't just have 20 students in my class reading 20 different books, and maybe another teacher at a different school has students with multiple books. Now we have a theme of challenge, but we have lots of different textbooks out there. We really wanted to take ownership and pick books that would support the standard. So Writing Freedom, it really was about a girl who was in an orphanage, and she had a challenge of living in a poor orphanage. She had to run away. In order to maintain a job, she had to dress up like a boy so that she could maintain her love of horses. So there was lots of things going on. This is set in the 1800s, so it talked about women's rights, it talked about the gold rush. All this was something that we developed as a unit so we could all touch on this as teachers. But the art of it, maybe I love a gold rush, so maybe I focus more on the gold rush. Maybe another teacher likes the idea of the suffragettes and women's right to vote. So it doesn't take the art of teaching away. If you look at the middle section where you see the little yellow buttons, that is more or less a scope and sequence. So I could click on any of those as well, and that'll launch the same daily lesson along with the resources. If you go below the yellow dots, what you see there is on a daily level, it'll tell you the reading standard. So if you see 5 RL2, that's actually Anchor 5 for reading literature and Objective 2. It gives me a description of what the students could do. What the teachers then do is they'll put that on their board so students can visually see, what are we working on today? So what we do is we usually turn it into more of an I can statement. So I can pick out the theme of a story, or I can compare 2 characters and 2 texts and relate them to each other. And then finally, you'll see a list of the resources. Wherever you see the blue links, that's something where teachers could literally click on those, and that launches an application, a website, or an online document that the students could use. So I think the best thing for me personally is that it really allows me to teach the way I want to teach, but it lets me use resources that I know other students are seeing in 5th grade. So by the time those 5th graders move on to Hauser, we know they've all experienced working with challenge, using multiple texts that are all united. So all the students could talk about these texts further. Going forward, then the 6th grade teachers could look at what we use, so they know, well, they're not going to do Writing Freedom again because they know we did that in 5th grade. Or I could look forward and say, oh, what are they doing in 6th grade? What could I do what resources could we use to help them out going forward? And then that'll bring me back to Dr. Gannon, who'll wrap things up for us.
Thank you, Steve. Honestly, that might be the longest outside of a movie that I've sat silently. So nice job, guys. Thank you so much. I might have been talking to myself a little bit. But before I go over this next slide, I just want to share a couple things. One is there's a question that was asked earlier today about some of the math curriculum, like that's a number sense in particular, that seems to start out a little bit slower. Part of that is because, as you can see, even in the Abbott and Costello video, the message is not that the correct answer is, okay. Because I know you hear Common Core 2 + 2 = 5. I don't know if you heard that, but that's out there too. But the reason we focus so much on a concept like number sense in the beginning is that students really have to have a solid mastery of that, because everything, as you can see, there's more depth. Everything, builds on the skills that they learn when they're younger. Another piece, too, is that when Mr. Preble was talking about the ELA shifts, he was using some higher-level examples of what student writing might look like. I'd say 4th or 5th grade examples. He was using different, examples of, and Ms. Gorman did, too, about some of the text that students might read. But what you should be seeing at home is that your students are starting to work on those skills just at an age-appropriate text. So they're pulling from their writing, they're pulling evidence. A great question at home is, how do you know? Prove it. What evidence is there in the text that proves your claim? We talk a lot about claims, we talk a lot about evidence, we talk a lot about proving it. the types of text-based questions and text-based answers. That's all starting in kindergarten, and building and building and building and building upon each other. You'll also see in the Synced Solution, there were a bunch of different resources that Mr. Eldredness just went through. Those resources provide teachers different options of what to use, and at varying levels as well. So when we're looking at text complexity, we want to make sure that we have appropriate text in front of students. With that said, you may once in a while kind of wonder, why is my child reading this text? It's too easy. Part of that is because we're using it to teach a very difficult standard to comprehend. And what we want to do is build confidence. We want to teach that standard. We want to build confidence within that, that standard, and then we'll move to the appropriate level of complexity for the student, so the child can concentrate on mastering that standard, gain the confidence, and move forward from there. All right. So one of the last slides that we have is, and we talked a little bit about this before, is what the standards don't address. And one of them is the how to teach. It's interesting because I've gotten more questions lately about teachers that are interested in the how. And at first, when we first did this, that was the last thing we wanted to kind of cover, because we want that freedom, we want that expertise. But when we say that it doesn't tell the how, it doesn't mean that we're not working on consistent instructional strategies within the school district that are proven to be effective. Some of our PD, our Monday PD, which has been extremely helpful, some of that is focusing on teaching and learning and instructional strategies. Teachers collaborating on how they're teaching. It doesn't focus at all on intervention methods or materials to support students who are well below or well above grade level expectations. So those are things that we, in our curriculum, will continue to add, continue to adjust, to make sure that we are challenging each and every child, and to make sure we're challenging them at an appropriate level. And then range of supports appropriate for English language learners and students with special needs. So those are things that we've been working on throughout the year. We'll continue to work on as well to implement that into our Common Core curriculum. One other thing that I just want to point out is, and I did take a couple notes because I couldn't talk, is going back to that math video. The mathematical practices standards. There's, there are quite a few of them, but really what they focus on is they focus on really understanding the work that you're doing and really understanding your response. So, for example, 20, the fact that 28 divided by 7 is 4, right? Yes, that's the answer. But you'll see that when he came up with 13, the mathematical practice behind that, along with the mathematical practice, will help students understand that, no, this just doesn't make sense. It's not just doing the calculation wrong, but then it's understanding why. What is this question really trying to get at? What are they asking me? And does this make sense? That's a very general, because there's a variety of them, but it's a lot of the thinking behind the mathematics. Which is very important, because that goes back into the question about problem solving. Okay, and then just one quick wrap up too is Ms. Gorman talked about the Lexile ranges, and she talked about reasons why we use Lexile, which is quantitative, and then qualitative measures as well. Lexile pretty much is a calculation of the length of words in sentences. Does not take into consideration, it's helpful, but it does not take into consideration what those words say, so the content. Another example is of mice and men is probably at, if you look at Lexile level, you're looking at probably a 5th grade level. But content-wise, we're not going to give your student that book to read at home. So, again, if you're kind of wondering sometimes, well, this seems like kind of an easier text, quantitatively, there's probably a reason behind, but always ask. Please always ask, because we want to make sure that we're doing it right as well. Okay, so our next steps. Right now, we're in the process of implementing the new curriculum, and I'm sorry about that extra space there. We're consistently revising our Mondays PD time. So far has mainly been used for our grade levels to get together, review what they're doing, collaborate on what they're doing, share best practices, share resources, take notes, and make it better. We talk about, as I said, instructional strategies. We're looking for new tools and new resources. That's going to be kind of a consistent kind of, even though Common Core was adopted 4 years ago, there is still a lack of Common Core aligned resources out there. So we're always on the look. I just got a great email from my parents about a Math Facts website. I have a webinar scheduled tomorrow with someone from the company because it looks great. It's new, or at least it's new to us. So there's always stuff coming out. So we're always looking for what's the best that we can do for our kids of what's out there. We're going to enhance consistency and alignment of our report card grading system. One reason why, and this probably will not happen this year, and one reason why we designed the curriculum this way, using something like the Synced Solution, is because our teachers will have total understanding and mastery of the standards, what the standard entails, what it means to meet the standard, what it means to exceed the standard. We've designed curriculum based on that standard. So in order for our teaching and learning to be top-notch, it was critical for teachers to understand what each and every standard was asking, what each and every child needed to be able to do to be college and career ready. So that's the big part of our process, is that we designed based on mastery of those standards. That hadn't happened in the past, and I won't say about District 96 because I wasn't here, but I know in other experiences, standards weren't necessarily even addressed. But this is what we need to be teaching our kids. This and beyond, but not, go ahead, sorry, Chris.
So is the PARC assessment going to evaluate our kids' ability to meet these standards?
Yes. PARC assessment is completely a standards-aligned assessment. Text independent, meaning it doesn't matter what you've read before. It doesn't matter what you've been exposed to before. It's that standard. So they're going to give kids writing. They're going to give kids reading responses. They're going to give kids there'll be some multiple choice, but in multiple choice, there's going to be several different options for answers. And what I mean by that is that there might be 4 out of the 6 are correct. Okay, again, that's that understanding the problem, understanding what they're asking. And they're going to be giving them reading passages in which they'll have to prove evidence from the text to support their question. So it's all based on the standards themselves and not on any particular text. Mm-hmm. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the MAP test is it's similar to PARC in the sense where it is a text-independent assessment. So students are given questions that are all based on the Common Core standards. Again, not based on any previous red text or anything, just the standards themselves. And as students get questions right, they climb up the ladder that you saw in the video of that standard until they start to level off by not answering questions correctly anymore. So what happens then is that once a student levels off and conceptually based on quite a number of standards, the student will get what's called a RIT score. And then that score correlates to a percentile. But what's beyond that is that we are able to then go into student performance, and teachers are able to see where students succeeded and where they struggled and align instruction based on that. But MAP is, what I love about MAP, now MAP isn't going to have the long writing parts. They just implemented last year multiple choice where there's more than one correct answer, which has been tricky for kids. They've implemented some of the skills that students are going to need technology-wise on the PARC test. Drag and drop, manipulating images, starting videos, just, so they're coming along. And it looks more like what the park test will look like, but until we really see the park test itself, we'll never know that for sure. But a neat thing about MAP to go along with that too is that MAP is given, in our district, we're giving it 3 times this year. In the past, we gave it twice. In the fall, and then in the spring. And I'll be real honest and say, look, we do not want to over-assess our kids, and I am very sensitive to that. But what happens with something like the MAP test is, if you give it in the spring, students are given a growth target. Based on their RIT score, they're given a target where they should land. They should grow at least this many points, which is more than one school year's growth. And that's our, that's our role as educators to help them get there. But if we only do that in the fall and then in the spring, it's too late to know if we're on the right path to get them there. We need to have it in the middle as a progress monitoring tool so we can adjust our instruction as needed. So, and I'm not sure if I answered your question, but.
Well, so the math test has been, it's constantly evolving, basically. Like last year's math test is
Yes. Well, the MAP test, students will probably never see the same question twice. Their question bank is huge. So, and they're always adding questions and taking questions out. Yeah. Let's go to questions. Yes?
How many of your old instructional materials, textbooks and such are you able to use now that you've aligned with
Yeah.
Common Core, and do you plan to purchase a lot of new textbooks or whatever?
Yeah, we've definitely purchased supplemental materials. We've definitely, have brought in a lot of, especially, literacy materials to help fill gaps in our curriculum. But this is a continuous cycle in the sense where, we wanted to be very fiscally responsible in the process as well. And a lot of times it's, there are good stories in these books that we have. It's just where do you use them, when do you use them, how do you use them? But this is going to be a continuous process because as we are going through this curriculum this year, we didn't want to spend a ton of money because as we're going through it this year, we're going to have a really better focused idea of what we might need to look at in the future as well. So, but we were able to use more than I thought, to be honest with you. I can't give you a percent, but it was more than I thought we were going to be able to. So, yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry, let's go in the front and then in the back.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you're going to help the students at each end of the spectrum? You're going to get students personally to be able to be more confident to start off with and others that will lag behind. What are you going to do with the ones that have mastered the standards quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be bored and are doing practice work until the others catch up? What are we doing here?
Great question. And so the question is, no, they should never be bored. But that's, and I take that to heart, and I appreciate the question. So basically, the way that the standards are aligned is that once a student masters a standard, teachers are to differentiate their instruction, meaning they can go more in depth in that concept of the standard. So what that means is that if a student mastered a specific standard in 2nd grade, they may be looking at 3rd or 4th grade standard that is aligned. So in class, conceptually, they're focusing on the same concept, but they're going into it at a much higher level. The Common Core is really nice because it's written to allow us to differentiate in a way where it's more natural. We're not just kind of pulling things here and pulling ideas there. I told our teachers, I said, the best problem to have is for us to have to look at our Synced Solution or look at our curriculum and say, oops, in 2nd grade, and for them to say, oh, we already covered, these 3rd grade standards. That's awesome. Let's get back to work and let's take a look at the next level and let's go there. We're not going to run out of standards, and we're not going to run out. We even put the high school standards in math. They're in there because we're not going to run out. We will teach them to the students' level. So, yes.
It seems since the advent of electronics doing our spell check for us and now it's texting and spelling in the English, and I haven't really heard that addressed. And I don't know if there are actual spelling standards or if that's addressed
Excellent question. Spelling is addressed across the curriculum. Within the Synced Solution, what we didn't show you is there are language standards or speaking and listening standards. I was going to do some speaking and listening modeling today, but I decided not to. Yes, they're addressed. We adopted a new spelling curriculum last year, and what we've had to do this year is go in and realign that curriculum with the Common Core. And then put those lessons in the appropriate places. The language, I'll be honest with you and say that language piece, each grade level is focusing on the language piece, but that is one of our main focuses in our PD this year as well. So, yes?
I'd like a little bit more detail. I don't see any weekly tests on it, and I know a couple of other parents that I've talked to are not seeing weekly tests, they're not seeing corrections done. You know, for instance, my son writes something about his book in a book report, the theory is fine, you know.
Okay.
He got the information down, but the misspellings are gross and blatant, and so I'm correcting them for him to make
Okay.
sure, you know, it's not what she's supposed to, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, sure, I understand the question. I could say it's misspellings are not meant to be overlooked. If that, but again, it's we're in the process of realigning spelling expectations. But when students are one of the best ways to teach spelling is to teach spelling in context. So when students are misspelling words, that should be an opportunity for a review or a lesson. So I don't want to talk about specific classrooms or get too into those details. Right. Right. It is, K-8 is it's a Regie Routman spelling program. So we actually it's K-5. We have the spelling program through K-5, and we have actually a new phonics program at the primary levels. And then within each unit in the Synced Solution, teachers have those materials aligned to their instruction. So that's the expectation. Again, I don't want to get into specifics but we can talk. Absolutely, sure. Lisa? Yeah.
It has to matter that it's spelled incorrectly. I think we're just wondering when is that point that we care more about that. So they ramp up and they keep writing, and that's great because we want to encourage them to write.
Right.
Then at some point spelling has to matter. I think we're just
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I think that is something that it's actually already scheduled for our PD, but there's a point, when kids first learn to write, and this isn't even Common Core. Really, that hasn't changed with Common Core necessarily, but when kids learn how to write, you don't necessarily focus on spelling, and they write phonetically in kindergarten in the early ages. But with that said, the focus of the spelling program focuses more on what's the best way to put it? Like letter blends, letter sounds, understanding. So it's not memorizing words, but it's understanding letter blends, letter sounds, the silent letters and that, so that kids will understand how to spell words that they don't yet know. And that really, that should be starting, foundationally or fundamentally in kindergarten with specific words and blends. So again, that is definitely something that is on our radar to focus on, and also to really kind of make sure that that's happening in the classroom, but it is part of the curriculum.
I have a question.
Sure.
Thinking about the example of your daughter showing me how to do the
Yeah.
program properly, if you'll ever consider flip learning,
Mhm.
especially as it pertains to math, so they get the method, and then they can watch, follow up, at home.
We have, and we actually have some classrooms that are working in a flip learning setting as well. And from what we have seen, it's been very effective. Matter of fact, that's one of the instructional strategies that we were referring to before about that addresses some of the how in a very effective manner. So those are some of the things that we're introducing to staff, and a couple classes are piloting it right now, actually. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I want to go back to math. It seems to me that the increase in rigor
I can.
I have 2 kids, so I have Central and Hauser, and I have a 6th grader, so I've just experienced it's an interesting vantage point. And so my heart goes out to the teachers and everyone who's working through this transition, but from my middle childhood students,
Sure.
we are right in the middle of this increase in rigor, right as we're also making a transition. So I have a couple, in terms of the what and the how, I'm totally on board with the what and the standards.
Mhm.
I teach at the university level. I see my students showing up there unprepared. But I'm very interested in the discussion of the how. So at the elementary level, like the fundamentals related to basic arithmetic
Yep.
and the multiplicity of strategies that the students are exposed to, matrix, lattice, multiplication, quotients division. And the video, I think, is really interesting because I think that sometimes kids, not just my kids, but kids that I see in college, because of the multiplicity of strategies that they're exposed to, without any real understanding of what they're doing, they think that they can manipulate
Yeah.
things in any one way. And so we go from there, and I have some concerns about teaching students strategies that are really time-consuming,
Mhm.
as multiplication, and then giving them a high-stakes kind of task where, by the time they draw the lattice, they really should be on to step 4,
Sure.
but they're still working through the multiplication. So I have some concerns about that, but more significantly now, I am worried that the increased rigor in mathematics, I think, is warranted. I am a social scientist. I love the focus on preparation for STEM.
Mhm.
I'm on board with all of it, right? The evidence-based thinking and reasoning and writing like a scientist is what our country needs. But at the Hauser level, for example, their time in math, like the actual number of instructional minutes that they spend in math, is really not a lot. And this standard makes sense of problems and perseverance solving. So I know my daughter's been dealing with hows, the problem.
Yep.
Wanting to dissolve in tears, the reason abstractly and quantitatively. So when we have, we just came out of a unit on ratios where each problem has, maybe I was able to explicate probably 6 to 8 steps that need to be done to solve the problem. But without a textbook, with limited instructional time, I'm helping her. She's not even clear sometimes on when to multiply, when to divide. And so I'm just wondering about scaffolding in the classroom. I'm wondering about, for ELA, you talk about how we're going to, we'll see that in the social sciences, we'll see
Mhm.
it in other subjects. But for mathematics, I definitely see it in science. I can tell you because I spent a lot of time looking at what she's doing. But I say that the science homework is also ratios, even though it's not
Mhm.
all that, moving back and forth in units of measure. But I'm concerned about whether anyone's thinking about more instructional minutes for math, revamping the curriculum, providing more support, because this is critical.
Absolutely, and that's a great question. The answer to that is yes, and I don't think it's a secret. We are looking. A matter of fact, Mr. Druck and I have already started working on a new schedule for Hauser for next school year that increases the math block. We increased the ELA block this year. We are, the reason we're starting now is because there's a lot of things that are involved in that, but that is one of our top priorities. The other thing too is that with the implementation of the new materials, although we predicted gaps, this is the first time that we're actually able to see exactly what those gaps are. So the scaffolding now is being revised and realigned with where those gaps are for the students. So we're slowing down because reality is that, and you'll see our junior high math teachers aren't using the calendar because, like on the Synced Solution, because right now going too fast isn't going to help. We have to scaffold, we have to build, we have to close that gap. And so that is one of our focuses this year. And again, the gap is, it's been interesting because our curriculum before, led to gaps that are varying at different levels when we aligned to Common Core, basically. And that is a really big one at the junior high. So ideally, we'd like to have 80 minutes of math. I mean, that would be our ideal. So, okay, we have time for a couple more, and then I want to, Mr. Petito is going to show you a new My Math at home resource that we have as well. So, yes, ma'am.
with mathematics assessment and what to do with students who have already mastered
Mhm.
material. I'm gathering that it seems like the early on mathematics is based on number sense and operations, and then later we get more higher level thinking in a sense. I mean, I know you have to understand
Yeah.
numbers of success is extremely important, I understand that. But what about those students who have already mastered the number sets? Like, they've got it, they're ready to move on. Is there any thought on, and I guess I was thinking about the assessment, if we wait until math to get the results, we've already wasted
Yeah.
class time. How are teachers going to be assessing along the way in a consistent manner, and would they then be able to do some sort of like flexible grouping where, okay, this group of third graders has mastered this, this one still needs to work on it, this one needs even more in-depth, concentrated work on that, and then maybe move
Yeah.
students from classroom to classroom based on that, but not necessarily with the track, because they're not set in that. It might be based on whatever things they're working on in that unit.
Yes, and actually, this I'll give away a secret to the staff. But when I just planned the Institute Day on the 10th, we are focusing on some new resources that we have that for mathematics that are exactly aligned to that. It's well, what it is there's varying levels of critical thinking, mathematical practice type activities for students to do that are focused within a standard. And there's you have your below level, on level, and above level activities. It's all kinds. There's also some computer resources within that as well. But there's games. There's all kinds of creative things that kids can do in a math center that is appropriate. We've also last year we did it at 2 schools, and we're looking to expand it this year. Is that we've had a 20-minute math period in which we regrouped all the students based on where they were on a specific concept. And so like at Hollywood, we would have all different grade levels working together because it was where that student is at on that concept. And that, again, is continuing at those 2 schools, and now I'm working with the other 2 schools to get that going as well. And you think 20 minutes is only 20 minutes, but it's 20 minutes of extremely targeted instruction for where that student is at. And so when we looked at last year's ISAT scores, I'm not saying this is the only reason, but those buildings did very well. Those kids did very well. So there's definitely stuff that is in place. And I'll be 100% honest with you too. MAP was supposed to be done a lot earlier, but we had infrastructure issues with our technology. I'm very big on, I don't want to have the kids come in and say you're testing, but I want to get that information in within the first couple of weeks because we needed to drive instruction. And so it was kind of disappointing on my end as well, but there was nothing we could have done about it at the time. Yeah. Yes. Even within our My Math, Common Core Line materials, there are varying levels of assessments, cross-grade level, and teachers have access to a variety of standards-based assessments. And those are things that, along with MAP, that we'll use to help group our kids as well. So, yeah. Right.
Kind of thinking about that, has there been any discussion before asking questions about different ends of the spectrum and Common Core is all about going deeper into material? Has there been any discussion with all these new administrators who have been in other schools about the idea of co-teaching in these classrooms? Because it sounds like that might be something to consider. It can allow the teachers to go deeper in on the various topics, but then also help to differentiate the instruction for those that are across the spectrum. It's something District 96 has, I think, only done once at Hollywood years ago. And I'm curious if it's something that is being discussed or thought about, if anybody's had experience with it from other schools with Common Core.
Sure. I'll start that, and then if anybody behind me has an additional experience. This year you'll see more teachers, both ELL teachers, some of us special education teachers, and we're trying to work it through our, if we can get, even Quest teachers. to be inside the classroom with kids, really differentiating and enhancing that instruction and co-teaching with their colleagues. To be honest with you, right now we're able to make it happen with special ed and ELL. It's great for two reasons. One, they really get to know the curriculum. They really get to see and support the teacher and the students in that classroom, so everything is aligned and everything, when students get pulled out per se and we go away from the coach teaching model, it's not, you risk an alignment concern with what's happening in the classroom. I think that's the case anytime. One of our, and I keep going back to our professional development, but this is, again, why it was so important for us, is one of our topics on the professional development is actually training on the co-teaching model. Because even though we're having more teachers support students in the classroom, there's a whole training and philosophy around what it means to effectively co-teach with another teacher. So that, I can't tell you exactly where that is on our PD agenda, but I think online, if you look, you'll see that. But yes, we've looked at that for quite a bit. You guys, Kurt?
Along with the professional development, to truly understand the philosophy behind co-teaching, because co-teaching doesn't just mean you have two teachers in a classroom and you teach a lesson. There's an entire philosophy behind it. But one of the things that was done this year was the schools created a master schedule that aligned the ELA and the math blocks so that there could be more push and opportunity, especially for resource teachers, that instead of pulling students out, we're now pushing in, which is going to create the time that we'll be able to have those the two teachers in the room. The next step is, now that we have the structure in place, work on the philosophy and the concept behind actually having a successful co-teaching experience in the classroom.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Bob so we don't run out of time. And Bob's going to just share. I know part of today was really supposed to be, as well on how to help at home. Please take a look at those resources that we shared, those websites. But I also wanted, I asked Bob to come join us and kind of go through a new resource that your students will be able to have at home. We don't have parent access portals to it. We are thinking about it and working on it with the company, because that would be really cool. But you would log on as, with your child or as your student. We'll give you permission to log on as your student, and you use it as you feel is best. So. Okay.
Yes, good evening. My name is Robert Petito. I'm the new Instructional Technology Coordinator for District 96. I'm excited to be a part of your community and part of your family, so thank you. One of the new resources that we have as part of our math curriculum for K-5 is ConnectEd's McGraw-Hill's My Math. And it's the new curriculum that is aligned to Common Core. And they have some really great lessons and really have some really nice resources for teachers that they can use in the classroom. They have electronic books that they can use. They're interactive as well, so we already have all the interactive projectors in the classrooms. So it actually gets the ability for having the students to be up there, getting some interactive learning with interactive manipulatives as well as part of the presentation. With that also comes the transparency part of it, so that all of the resources that we have as a teacher, the students have their version of it, not only in a paper-based ancillary like they have as a workbook, but they also have it electronically as well. And they have access to that 24/7 via the website. If you haven't already received one, you will at some point, a parent letter stating that you have, or your child has had a ConnectEd account created for them via MyMath, along with a password card that tells them what their username and password is. And it's all pictorial, so it's really easy for them to log in. You can use that same login in order to access the website as well. On the card, it actually has the URL for the website too, so all you need is just that one card, and if you lose it, the teacher can always print off more of those. And when you go to the URL, you'll see your school's class page, or your school page here, with all the different teachers who are who have signed up for the system so far. And more of our teachers are logging into this and creating their classrooms and so forth. They've been using the curriculum now all year, but now they're finally starting to get really engaged with the online content, and are able to share that not only with the students, but with you as well. And so, for example, you would go ahead and find your after logging in, or going to the URL, you would find your teacher's name. So for example, I would go to sample class here at the bottom. And upon doing so, you'll be presented with names of your kids. And so all you have to do is just find the name of your child. And you have that icon that represents them as well. It's also on your password card. You go ahead and click on that. And again, it's just a pictorial password. So there's nothing to type, no words to memorize. It's just that pictorial password. And so he'll go ahead and do that here. And then the login's at the bottom. Okay, and upon doing so, you'll get brought to the books and the content. And all you have to do to access the content is just click on the book. And the home page that gets set up here is almost a direct mirror of what the teacher has, except that it's more aligned for student access rather than teacher access. So the teacher has the exact same view with some just different labeled tabs up on top in terms of presentation of material. Whereas here, the student has the way just to access their versions of the material. You can see that teachers are able to post messages there, assign homework through there if they so chose. Other teachers are using the platform in different ways. Some of them are using Edmodo or Google or things like that to deliver the work. Some teachers are electing to use this in order to deliver the work. So it's based upon the preference of the teacher, and again, that just kind of speaks to the creativity as to how the teacher wants to go about assigning the material. But what's really nice is that I actually have 3 daughters, 2 of them of which are also using My Math in their school district. And there are some times where I just don't know how it is that the teacher wants me to help them out at home, right? And they've done a really nice job so far of giving me newsletters and so forth about what they're doing, but it's really nice just to see it for myself, what it is that they're learning and the instructional models and mathematical practices that the teachers are using in the classroom as well. And so what's nice here is that you can see by lesson all the different concepts, as well as it gives you the actual student book electronically as well. So right there in smack dab in the middle, you see open ebook. And if you were to click on that, you'd actually get an interactive ebook that you can filter through and organize and be able to take notes in and so forth. The student has that ability to, obviously. This is their login after all. And you can see that the bottom of each page also has highlighted in color the different associated resources that go along with that. So if your child is bringing home a worksheet that's torn out of the book for chapter 1 or lesson 1, unit 1, so forth, and it has that page, you can go there as well and see all the different related resources as a parent that I can use in order to help my child at home. So in addition to those, you also have a glossary at the top too, so if there's a mathematical term that isn't making quite sense to you, they have that ability there to access the glossary for all the different mathematical terms. There's also cards that go along with those, so working on your spelling, for example, you can get a mixture of math and spelling at the same time by practicing their mathematical glossary. If you want to head back, just one last thing to that homepage. The last thing here is if you just want to get a good cursory overview of all the different resources you can have at one particular lesson, by using the drop downs, so you can see there on chapter 1, lesson 1, right? He's already there for number sense 0 to 5. Right? I don't necessarily have to go through the ebook and find exactly what it is that I'm trying to look for in terms of just content for helping out my child at home. Right next to where it says open ebook in the middle, there's like a little scrolling. There's those 4 pictures up on top in the right, and each of those is a resource that goes along with the lesson. And so each of those, again, those are things that you can either, those are either interactive games online that they can play, or it could be something that's a printable that gets print out, something like that you can, again, utilize in order to help your child out at home. And the very, very last thing that I've actually used with my daughters is the project-based learning that's integrated in this as well. So in the chapter drop-down, at the very bottom, you should see something that says project-based learning. I think it's in the chapter drop-down. Yeah. And so for select chapters, they actually have at-home activities that you can do in order to further develop that concept. And it's like arts and crafts things, or it's ways for them to think and create posters. So it kind of blends the fine arts along with the math in order for them to kind of build that concept based upon how your child decides to learn. And again, all this is available for free for you, as well as your student, in order to help deliver that math content. All right, thank you. Exactly. So, Right, so the parent letter that we had created was given to them over the weekend. So if you haven't already received it, you will receive it very, very shortly. So Extra Math is a different website that is also standards aligned that the teacher may elect to use as just another resource to use in the classroom to help build math skills and so forth. This is their math curriculum, so this is what they will be using in the classroom in order to deliver the instruction.
Is there any way on the Extra Math to move it to like the next level, or is it just stuck at whatever level you are in?
I think it's because I think the teacher assigns the activities. Is that correct in Extra Math? Yeah, so if there's so Extra Math is again it's promoted by the teacher. So the different activities. So if you see that your child has already mastered that, that's just a quick email to the teacher saying, hey, would you mind opening it up a little bit more? Because it's all the restrictions and so forth are set by the teacher as they go along. They can. Yep. Yes.
Last year, kids had access to something called RAS Kids.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to have that this year?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, when we developed the curriculum for the Common Core, we went to RAS Kids for a lot of the nonfiction pieces. We thought they had so many great stories, and it was great to look at the level of reading to see if it was appropriate. We had a lot of resources that went with it, so I personally like that we could just upload the file, so if RAS Kids wasn't there, we were able to grab the documents themselves. Through the Synced Solution, we have access to those files. Yes, I'm planning on using RAS Kids extensively. And that's going to be a place for me to do a lot of challenge activities too. So if I'm doing a topic of oil or energy, I might try to find multiple resources at a more challenging level for my students that need that extra challenge to go deeper.
Well, we thank everybody for coming. I apologize for going over. But we hope to have at least 2 more of these this year at Parent Universities. It's something new that we're trying. Our goal this year is 1 per trimester. And then if they're successful and we get good turnouts and people want more, we'll work on that as well. So thank you so much for coming. Have a great evening.